These moments were never supposed to exist on camera. Security feeds, phone videos, bystander clips, all of them captured what parks hoped would stay invisible. 6 accidents, all recorded. All of them, the end of a chain that started long before anyone pressed record. We start at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City in 2016, a water slide called Verrückt, German for insane, designed without engineers, tested with sandbags that flew off during every trial run. And on August 7th, a 10-year-old boy named Caleb Schwab who climbed 264 steps and never came back down. August 7th, 2016 was elected officials' day at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City, the one day per year when the park offered free entry to state representatives and their families. Scott Schwab was a Kansas state representative. He brought his wife Michelle and their 4 sons. 10-year-old Caleb was the most excited of all of them. The park's centerpiece attraction was Verrückt, a water slide standing 168 feet tall, certified by Guinness World Records as the tallest water slide on Earth. The name meant insane in German, and from the moment construction began, the name was more accurate than anyone publicly admitted. Verrückt was designed by Jeff Henry, the park's co-owner, who held no engineering credentials of any kind. The ride was built entirely through trial and error rather than any formal engineering process. During pre-opening tests, sandbags placed on rafts to simulate rider weight repeatedly launched off the slide at the second hill, going fully airborne. The solution the team landed on was to install overhead netting with metal support poles above that section of the slide to catch anything that went airborne. Nobody stopped to calculate what those poles would do to a human body traveling at full speed. A consultant had previously recommended a minimum age of 16 for the ride. The park set no age restriction. When a separate engineering firm submitted a formal warning about the ride's hazardous behavior, it was dismissed. Verrückt opened to the public anyway. Caleb and his 12-year-old brother Nathan ascended the 264 steps together. Nathan rode first and waited at the bottom. Then it was Caleb's turn. He took the front seat of Raft B with 2 adult women behind him. His weight of 73 pounds against the 2 heavier women behind him created a severe imbalance in weight distribution toward the rear of the raft. The combined weight was within the technical limit of 550 pounds, but the distribution was the problem. Raft B had also shown a documented tendency to travel faster and go airborne more frequently than other rafts on the same slide. Nobody flagged it that day. Nobody pulled it from service. The raft dropped down the first 17-story plunge and launched over the second hill. It went fully airborne. The front of the raft struck the metal support pole in the overhead netting with enormous force. Caleb was killed instantly. His body descended the remainder of the chute, leaving a trail visible to everyone standing at the bottom. Nathan watched it happen from where he was waiting. Their mother, Michelle, tried to run toward Caleb and had to be physically restrained by other witnesses who understood she could not see what was at the bottom. Their father, Scott, stood nearby repeatedly asking if his son was dead. Emergency services confirmed that he was. In the investigation that followed, it emerged that at least 13 other riders had suffered concussions and herniated discs on Verrückt before Caleb's death, with none of those incidents triggering any serious safety review of the ride's design. In early 2017, the Schwab family settled with Schlitterbahn and related parties for approximately $20 million. Jeff Henry and 2 other individuals were indicted in March 2018 on charges including second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. Those charges were dropped the following year due to issues with how evidence had been obtained. Verrückt was demolished in 2018. The Kansas City park closed permanently that same year. The netting and the poles that killed a 10-year-old boy were photographed extensively before demolition. Those photographs still exist. The slide itself does not. July 26, 2017. Opening night at the Ohio State Fair in Columbus. 18-year-old Tyler Gerald had just enlisted in the Marine Corps. His girlfriend, Khadijah Lewis, stood beside him in line. The fireball had been inspected and cleared 4 times in 2 days, including that same morning. At 7:24 in the evening, a row of seats separated from the ride arm at full speed, and the crowd below watched it happen in real time. Tyler Gerald was 18 years old when he arrived at the Ohio State Fair on July 26, 2017. He had recently graduated high school and enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, a decision his family described with enormous pride. A photo he posted to social media showed him holding a plaque in his Marine Corps uniform, grinning. He and his girlfriend, Khadijah Lewis, had spent the day at the fair. The fireball was to be their last ride of the evening before heading home. The fireball was one of the fair's headline attractions, a large pendulum that swung riders 40 feet into the air while spinning the gondola at 13 revolutions per minute. It had been inspected 3 or 4 times across the 2 days preceding the fair's opening, according to the state's chief ride inspector Michael Vartarella, who had personally cleared it to operate. Engineers had signed off that same morning. Every external check had come back clean. There was nothing on the outside of the ride that suggested what was happening on the inside. At 7:24 in the evening, the fireball reached the peak of its arc, and a full row of seats tore free from the ride arm and launched outward into the air. 2 riders struck the concrete from nearly 20 feet. Others were hit by metal debris traveling at speed. Tyler was thrown clear of the ride entirely and was killed on impact. The Franklin County coroner confirmed his cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head, chest, and lower body. 7 others were hospitalized. Khadija survived but sustained crushed bones, internal trauma, and injuries that would require multiple surgeries and years of rehabilitation. Medical costs for her treatment eventually exceeded $2 million. She later described waking up in hospital after surgery and being told that Tyler was gone. The investigation went directly to the manufacturer, KMG International, a Dutch company that flew its own team to the scene. What they found was not a broken weld or a failed bolt in any conventional sense. The core steel tube forming the gondola support beam, the hollow structural arm at the center of the ride, had been corroding from the inside for years. Moisture had penetrated the hollow beam over 18 years of operation and had been eating away at the metal wall thickness from the interior outward. By the time the fireball swung at full speed on opening night, the wall had thinned to a fragile shell. There was no external sign of it. No inspector running a visual or standard physical check could have found it without cutting into the beam itself. When the ride reached peak rotational force, the shell gave out. KMG immediately ordered all 43 Fireball rides operating worldwide to cease operations pending inspection. Fairs across the United States, from California to New Jersey, shut down similar pendulum rides. Tyler's mother, Amber Duffield, became the primary force behind what became Tyler's Law, a regulatory initiative that resulted in Ohio passing mandatory structural testing and documentation requirements for all fair ride critical components in 2020, 3 years after her son died. In 2024, a New Jersey court ruled in favor of the victims in the lawsuit against KMG. Khadija received $20 million, half of it awarded as punitive damages, specifically against the manufacturer. Tyler's family received no verdict that gave them anything back. The Fireball continues to operate at fairs and carnivals across the United States under different names. KMG states all current models have been rebuilt under new inspection standards. Six Flags Over Texas, July 19, 2013. 52-year-old Rosa Esparza told the ride attendant before dispatch that her restraint only clicked once and did not feel secure. A witness standing in line heard everything. The attendant told Rosa that as long as she heard a click, she was fine. The ride launched. Rosa's daughter was seated in the car directly in front of her. Rosa Ayaga Esparza was 52 years old and visiting Six Flags Over Texas for the very first time on the evening of July 19, 2013. She had come with her daughter and son-in-law. They had spent the day working through the park's attractions, and the new Texas Giant was to be one of their last rides before heading home. Rosa was described by her family as adventurous, someone always eager to try new things and explore new places. That spirit brought her to Car 3 of the new Texas Giant that evening. The new Texas Giant was a hybrid coaster, combining steel track structure with wooden aesthetic elements, standing 153 feet tall with a 147-foot drop. It had opened in 2011, replacing the original all-wood Texas Giant, which had been retired amid complaints about its rough ride and structural concerns. The new version was considered a significant upgrade in both comfort and safety. It operated with a simple T-bar lap restraint system that came down over riders' laps and locked in place. Before the train was dispatched, Rosa expressed concern to the ride attendant. Her T-bar had only clicked once and did not feel fully locked down on her lap. A witness named Carmen Brown was standing in the queue nearby and heard the entire exchange clearly. The attendant's response, as Carmen later testified, was that as long as Rosa had heard it click, she was fine. The ride was dispatched. Rosa's daughter was in the car directly ahead of her. The train climbed the first lift hill and went into the initial drop, and then immediately into a sharp banked turn. On that turn, Rosa was ejected. Her daughter turned around during the descent to check on her mother. What she saw was Rosa upside down in the seat, her head near the floor and her feet in the air, gripping the restraint with both hands. 2 passengers seated behind Rosa attempted to reach forward and grab her, but could not. As the train ascended the third hill, Rosa was thrown from the car completely. The train continued its circuit. Rosa's family remained on board, unable to exit, not knowing whether she was alive. When the train returned to the station, they begged staff to let them off immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Rosa was pronounced dead at the scene. Her body was found partially severed and wrapped around a support beam on the roof of the honky-tonk tunnel below, with blood and tissue covering a 75-foot area. Firefighters took over an hour to recover her remains. The subsequent police investigation uncovered details that made the attendant's reassurance even more difficult to accept in retrospect. One park employee admitted to investigators that they had noticed Rosa's restraint appeared too high before the train launched. A second employee acknowledged the restraint did not look fully down on her thigh. The safety indicator system, which was supposed to confirm the restraint was locked, had malfunctioned earlier that same week. Beyond that, a separate witness came forward after the accident to report that her own daughter had experienced a nearly identical problem with the restraint in Car 3 just 1 week before Rosa's death. That incident had not been formally reported or investigated. Police ultimately ruled Rosa's death an accident and concluded there was no evidence of criminal misconduct. Six Flags closed the Texas Giant for several months and reopened it with redesigned restraints and seatbelts added to every seat. The family filed a lawsuit seeking at least $1 million in damages. In November 2014, they settled with Six Flags for an undisclosed amount, with no admission of fault from the park. Orlando Icon Park, March 24, 2022. 14-year-old Tyree Sampson had already been turned away from 2 other rides that day because of his size. The FreeFall led him on. Before the ride started, he told a friend the harness felt wrong and asked him to pass a message to his parents. Tyree Sampson was 14 years old, 6 foot 5 inches tall, and 383 pounds when he arrived at Icon Park in Orlando during spring break in March 2022. He was a football player, described by everyone who knew him as gentle and warm, known around his school as the Gentle Giant. The trip to Florida was supposed to be a joyful break with friends. That day at the park, Tyree had already been turned away from 2 separate rides for exceeding their weight restrictions. The Orlando FreeFall, which had opened just 3 months earlier as the world's tallest freestanding drop tower at 430 feet, led him bored. Tyree had not wanted to ride the FreeFall. He felt uncomfortable about the harness from the moment he sat down, noticing it did not fit properly against his body. A chilling photo taken by a friend just before the ride shows Tyree's harness visibly elevated compared to every other passenger on the ride, sitting noticeably higher and looser. Tyree told a friend beside him that the harness was moving. He then asked that same friend to tell his parents he loved them. The ride began its slow climb up 430 feet. At the top, the seats tilted forward 30 degrees, so all passengers faced the ground directly below them. The ride dropped. Tyree came out of the restraint during the descent. He fell over 300 feet and was pronounced dead at the scene. The entire sequence was captured on video by witnesses watching from below. That footage spread across social media within hours. The investigation that followed revealed the ride had not malfunctioned in any mechanical sense. The failure was deliberate and human. Forensic examination of Tyree's seat found that the harness sensor had been manually adjusted after the ride's original installation. Someone had physically moved the magnetic sensor that told the ride's computer whether the harness was in a safe position, shifting it so the system would register the harness as locked even when it was far from properly closed. On most seats, the maximum safe gap between the seat horn and the bottom of the restraint was 3.33 inches. On Tyree's seat, the gap measured 7.19 inches. The adjacent seat 2 measured 6.51 inches, also far beyond the standard. Both sensors had been tampered with. Both indicator lights showed green. Under the 4G braking force generated at the bottom of the drop, that 7-inch gap would have expanded by an additional 3 inches, making the opening effectively 10 inches wide. Safety engineers later concluded that survival under those conditions was not possible. The operator running the ride that day had been on the job for 3 days. He had received no formal training manual. His entire instruction had been to trust the indicator lights. The manufacturer's manual clearly stated that operators should physically pull on each harness before dispatch. That did not happen. The manual also stated that any rider who appeared too large should not be allowed to board. The video clearly showed Tyree's harness sitting visibly higher than every other passenger's. No posted weight limit signs existed at the ride entrance. No scale was available at the boarding area. The person who physically adjusted the sensors has never been publicly named. No criminal charges were filed against any individual. The park's owner paid a fine of $250,000. The Orlando FreeFall was demolished in March 2023. Tyree's mother, Nekia, stood at the site and watched it come down. The family was awarded $310 million in a subsequent wrongful death lawsuit. Six Flags over Georgia, June 28, 2008. Asia Ferguson was 17 years old and had lost his hat on the Batman roller coaster. He climbed 2 6-foot fences marked authorized personnel only and walked into the active track zone. The ride was traveling at 50 miles per hour. Asia Lean Ferguson IV was 17 years old when he arrived at Six Flags over Georgia on June 28, 2008, with a group of friends from Okie Springs Baptist Church. His parents, Asia Ferguson III and Letha, were also on the trip. It was a Saturday, bright and busy, the kind of park day that a 17-year-old with his whole life ahead of him should be able to look back on as a good memory. Asia was known by everyone around him for his grin, his generosity, his grades, and his love of basketball. He was the kind of teenager who made the people around him feel welcome. At some point during the day, Asia lost his hat while riding the Batman roller coaster, a suspended coaster where riders sit in seats that hang below the track with their feet dangling freely, traveling at speeds close to 50 miles per hour through a series of inversions and sharp banking turns. The hat fell into the restricted zone below the active track during the ride. Later that afternoon, Asia decided he wanted it back. What happened next was captured by park security cameras. An off-duty police officer who was at the park that day witnessed the impact and immediately called for emergency services. Park security and rescue crews responded within minutes. There was nothing they could do. Asia's father later spoke publicly about the son he lost, describing a young man who was always smiling, always ready to help, deeply loved by his friends and by his community. Whatever brought Asia over those two fences that afternoon, whether it was the hat, a shortcut, or something else entirely, those fences existed because the machinery on the other side operates without any awareness of who is standing in its path. Asia climbed them anyway. He was 17 years old and he was not supposed to die that day in a theme park in Georgia. But he did, and the camera was running. 5 stories. 5 completely different failure points. A slide built by people with no engineering training who watched sandbags fly during testing and kept building. A hollow steel beam corroding from the inside for 18 years while every external inspection came back clean. A restraint sensor moved by an unidentified hand that turned a green safety light into a lie. A ride attendant who told a nervous woman she was fine when she was not. And 2 fences that a 17-year-old believed did not apply to him. Every single one of these moments was caught on camera. The parks did not release the footage. They did not plan for it. In several of these cases, the public version of events shifted significantly once the recordings became impossible to suppress. The cameras did not cause any of these accidents. They just made certain the truth could not disappear along with the people who were lost. Subscribe and drop a comment telling us which story stayed with you the longest.